My name's Greg Knapp. This is the Greg Knapp Experience, your 20 to 30 minute thrill ride for your commute or your workout. Justice Breyer resigning from the Supreme Court, and Republicans need to fight for the Constitution. Law and order problems getting worse, liberals blaming the victims. One town is putting fees on your Second Amendment right. Joe Rogan beats Neil Young. Fauci says get ready to COVID vax your infants. And Trump hints that he's running again. It's all coming up on the Greg Knapp Experience. Let's go. It's time to fight for the Constitution. Supreme Court Justice Breyer is resigning. Does anyone believe that Joe Biden is going to nominate somebody for the Supreme Court who actually believes that they should rule on the cases and federal law and state laws based on what the Constitution said and was intended to mean as it was written? Because that's what the Supreme Court is supposed to do. But does anybody believe that's going to happen? No, because liberal justices believe that the Constitution is a living, breathing document. And what that really means is they can make it say whatever they want it to say, which means it means nothing. And that this oligarchy of men and women in black robes get to determine the ultimate outcome of your life. Now, I know that sounds hyperbolic, but in many instances, that is true, especially if your life happens to be inside your mother. So yes, it absolutely matters. And we need to get justices who believe the Constitution matters. If you don't like the Constitution, you know what you can do? Amend it. And we've done that 24 times. So yes, the Constitution can be wrong. And it does need to be amended from time to time. But it's not up to these men and women in robes to determine that. It's up to us, the people, and our representatives to write the laws better and to amend the Constitution. Man. So he's 83, 27 years on the court. It's a 50-50 Senate. You can't filibuster a judicial nominee for the Supreme Court, at least not now. And certainly the Democrats are not going to put a filibuster in right now since they're in control. So Biden can do whatever he wants to as long as he can get all of his Democrats to go along. With Kamala Harris, of course, as the tie-breaking vote, he will get what he wants if he can get all the Democrats on board. So if he goes too far left, he's not going to get it. So if he was smart, he wouldn't go too far left, because you can nominate a moderate liberal and it's going to be just as bad as a far left liberal on the bench. We've seen this time and time and time again. Justice Breyer was supposed to be a moderate liberal, and as the Wall Street Journal points out, he wasn't very liberal. Moderate. He wasn't very moderate. He was liberal. In a couple of business cases, fine. If it was something that wasn't that big of a case, he could be more moderate. But in the most cases, when it was a liberal idea that was before the court, a liberal law that was before the court, or a liberal case that was before the court, he went liberal. On the court, he became a single-minded crusader to use every available argument to hobble capital punishment, even though he said he would not be a knee-jerk objection to the death penalty when he was being confirmed. He was a reliable and invariable vote for abortion, same-sex marriage, and other liberal and progressive social causes. In recent years, he became progressively more shrill on matters relating to the COVID pandemic. Now, people say, well, Greg, conservatives on the court are just as bad. They just push what they want. No, they don't. I'm sorry, they don't. Look at the cases. What conservatives will do is argue based on the United States Constitution. And quite often, conservatives will rule against what they really want in their conservative ideology because of what the federal law is and what the Constitution is. You don't see that with the liberals. I'm sorry, you don't. You certainly don't in the last decade or so. 2 decades, really. So 50-50 Senate. What are the odds of him picking someone who isn't a far lefty, who actually believes in the Constitution? It's very, very low. And remember, Biden said, while he was candidate Biden, that he would pick a black woman for the Supreme Court. That's wrong in so many ways. Okay, first of all, it shows that he's going to discriminate. I mean, there's no other way to put it. You're going to discriminate if you're only going to interview black women for a position. You are discriminating. Yeah, but he's making up for things in the past. No, I'm sorry. You don't, 2 wrongs don't make a right. We've learned that from our moms for so long, right? And by the way, whatever black woman gets picked for the Supreme Court, now she's got this hanging over her. You were only picked as the black woman because Joe Biden said it would be a black woman. I'm sure these black women are going to be very qualified for the Supreme Court, except for the fact that they don't believe in the Constitution. But they're probably going to be very smart, very accomplished black women who now have this hanging over them. You're just a quota pick. So, as the Wall Street Journal points out, I totally agree with it. And I said from the second this happened, man, that the Republicans cannot stop this unless it's just such a crazy, crazy pick that even a couple Democrats object. But what they can do is press throughout the entire process the importance of fidelity to the Constitution of the United States of America, and get them on the record saying that they agree with that or they don't. And let's have that debate, because I think most Americans believe that the Constitution matters and it can't mean whatever you want it to mean. We have liberal justices on the Supreme Court that have said, well, we look at where society is, and we look at what the law over in Europe is doing. And no. You are not there to do all that. You are there to say whether a law is constitutional or not. That's it. Anyone doubt that no matter who Biden nominates, they're not going to believe what I just said. All right, there's some big stuff coming up. Abortion cases, gun cases, mask mandate cases, affirmative action cases. It's going to be a very, very important situation. Before we get deeper into Biden's pick, I'm asking you if you'll tell 3 friends to tell 3 friends about the show. If you appreciate the show and you're with me on the movement to push back against the left and stand up for what America is really about and what makes us exceptional, please tell 3 friends to tell 3 friends to listen to the show, Greg Knapp Experience. You're listening to it now, of course, anywhere that you can listen to podcasts. It should be. Like me on Facebook, Greg Knapp Experience Facebook page. I try to keep you up to date with everything I'm doing. I'm on Twitter and Parler and Gab and Rumble and YouTube for videos. So just check it out and pass it on, and super, super appreciate you helping me with that. Got to get people to know that this show exists. All right. So Jonathan Turley is a law professor at George Washington University, and he wrote a really nice piece about this today. He talked about Joe Biden going against a Supreme Court case, California versus Back, preferring members of any one group for no reason other than race or ethnic origin is discrimination for its own sake. That was Justice Lewis Powell. This, the Constitution forbids. Now, universities have gotten around that a little bit by saying, well, we're using race as a plus factor. We're not letting people in just based on the race. It's a plus factor, and it goes to the importance of diversity. And the courts have allowed that to some degree. There's a big case coming up very soon on this again, Harvard and Yale. But Biden using that threshold of you have to be a black woman is not illegal for what he's doing. He can nominate whoever he wants to, but it sure doesn't sound right, does it? And he didn't have to. The reason he made that pledge was to get Jim Clyburn's endorsement in South Carolina, and he got it, and to blunt what Kamala Harris was saying about him. Remember, Kamala Harris basically said he was a racist during one of the debates because he was against the busing to desegregate the schools, and he was against affirmative action early in his career. So he had to do something. So this is what he did. So now, I like how Turley puts this at the end. Biden is now going to create one of the more jarring and incongruous moments in the history of the Supreme Court. This fall in the Harvard and University of North Carolina cases, I'm sorry, I think I said Harvard and Yale, Harvard, North Carolina. The justices will hear arguments that the use of race in admissions is unlawful discrimination. One of them will have gained her seat, in part, through exclusionary criteria of race and sex. Mr. Biden will engage in discrimination for its own sake. That's the President of the United States of America. Law and order. I got a bunch of stories on law and order today because this is just getting insane. And so I'm going to go through these real quickly. And this is why it's important, too, about who's on the Supreme Court, because some of these things will probably end up there. Murders up 5% in 2021 compared to 2020, up 44% compared to 2019. Yeah, we've been having a problem. From about the mid-90s till a couple years ago, violent crime was going down every year. We were getting safer and safer and safer and safer. What were we doing during those times? Well, we had Rudy Giuliani doing his Broken Windows program in New York City, which was basically go after even the small crimes. Because if you're willing to commit a huge crime, you're willing to commit a small crime. Go after the small crime guys, enforce the law, and before you know it, you'll have fewer criminals on the street, actually enforce the amount of time they're supposed to be in prison. And gee, guess what? It worked. We even had 3 strikes and you're outlaws. Oh, those are discriminatory. No, they're not. It's based on you deciding to do that 3 times. All this stuff was working, and now we've totally reversed it all. Soft on crime, no cash bail, not prosecuting things that should be prosecuted, letting riots happen in the streets. And gee, guess what happens? These are updated findings from the Council on Criminal Justice. It's a nonpartisan criminal justice policy organization. It says, it is encouraging to see a slowdown in the recent homicide increase, a little bit less increase this year than last year. The bloodshed continues, and at least 10 U.S. cities lost historic numbers of residents to murder this year. This is not acceptable. We know there are multiple strategies with a track record of success in reducing violence, and of course, they're not using them. And I just outlined a few of them. So that's one, just showing you how bad it's getting. Well, how about the shoplifting? Seattle. John Sexton reported, Jason Ransom put up a couple of videos of what was going on in the Seattle downtown Target. It's been targeted by homeless people and shoplifters, and it's destroying the store. They say that they are getting shoplifted at least once every 10 minutes. Homeless men and women flood the Target, steal what they can. They won't get arrested, booked, or charged for most of the theft in Seattle. They've changed the laws. Even on a Saturday morning when the store didn't have many customers, I was told by a staffer, shoplifting happens about every 10 minutes. At either side of the store, they have security guards. They stop what they can without escalating the situation. Huh? So what that means is if you are shoplifting and they tell you to stop and you get all mad and wild and crazy and run, they're not going to do anything. They're going to let you go. And the thieves aren't even being arrested, even though they're caught on camera. They're just told to leave. That means they'll either go somewhere else to steal or they'll be back. Seattle City Attorney Ann Davison ran on a platform of prosecuting these crimes, but they're not. So eventually, if this stuff happens long enough, that Target will close, just like Walgreens and Rite Aids have been closing in San Francisco. There was another instance of that happening last week in New York City. Eventually, you think the people in these cities are going to get upset about it? See, right now, it's just, it's the big box store. Who cares if Target gets robbed? They got plenty of money. Well, first of all, they'll close, which will hurt all those people who have jobs there, all the people who shop there. Well, then they'll go on to the mom and pop stores. Will they care then? Will they eventually care enough to start cleaning up their town? Because pretty soon, nobody's going to want to go downtown, and it's going to be over. I remember when I lived in Dallas-Fort Worth area, the Fort Worth area, years before I'd gotten there, had been very sketchy, and a lot of people didn't like to go down there. Well, the Bass brothers, who owned a lot of the stores down there and a lot of the land, they said, all right, we're bringing in armed security guards. I think they might even paid off-duty police officers, and made it super safe so families felt they could come there, so the bars and restaurants felt like they could go there without being robbed and involved with fights every night and all this kind of stuff. And before you knew it, guess what happened? A thriving downtown. It is beautiful. Sundance Square and all that stuff. If you go to Fort Worth, it's a blast. Yeah, you've got to get law and order. Well, the liberals are saying the real problem is the victims. Huh? Well, Street Journal editorial. Car thefts in Milwaukee have tripled in the last 2 years. Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Amid a broader descent into public disorder. But instead of going after the thieves, the city council, the aldermen, want to sue the victims. Car makers. Well, yeah, car makers, Kia and Hyundai. Why? Well, it's just too easy to steal their cars. What? Too easy to steal the car? Yeah. You see, the back windows, evidently, you can break them and the alarm doesn't go off. So, wait a second. So people are stealing cars by breaking windows and hot wiring the car or whatever they do to get the car started. And the problem is not the person doing the stealing. The problem is the car maker didn't make the alarm tied to the back window. Yeah, they made it too easy to steal. I mean, what are these kids supposed to do? Not steal? I mean, you should be able to leave your key in the ignition and nobody would steal it. To be honest with you, we should be able to do that. Quit shooting on yourself. Yeah, I know. So more than 10,000 car thefts in Milwaukee last year. About half juveniles age 16 and older, many posting their joyrides on social media, but only about 2% are prosecuted. Now, that's not the problem. It's the Kia and the Hyundai. Several aldermen have encouraged the city's attorney's office to sue the automakers for allegedly causing a public nuisance. Yeah, 66% of the cars stolen are Kias and Hyundais. See, the word's spreading. Yeah, that's the problem. They're saying it's a public nuisance. They made their cars too easy a target for thieves. And these stolen cars are often involved in reckless driving. Milwaukee Alderman Khalif Rainey. The automakers are directly responsible, in my view, for the drain on police and other city resources that have been sadly directed to deal with the rash of vehicle thefts and the havoc those thefts have brought to our city. So the trend for the progressives is sue the businesses when thieves attack. And it's not just there. How about San Jose? This was coming for a while. San Jose has become the first city in the United States to approve a law requiring all gun owners to pay a fee for their gun and to carry liability insurance for their gun. Now, they passed it the first time. but there has to be a final reading and then another vote in February. However, nobody thinks it's not going to pass. The San Jose City Council is all in on this. They want to get it done. It was a 10-1 vote, okay? It's going to happen. So, wait a second. To bear arms is a Second Amendment right guaranteed under our Constitution. And yet, we have a city council now saying that they are going to charge you a fee to exercise that right and force you to pay even more for insurance to exercise that right. I would call that highly unconstitutional. Are we going to have a fee for free speech, a fee for freedom of assembly, a fee for on and on we go? No. See, one of the things that makes something a right is that I don't require anything from you to get it, and you shouldn't charge me to get it. So freedom of speech, I'm not asking you to pay me any money to let me speak, but you are not allowed to charge me money to speak. Government cannot charge a fee for a constitutional right, man. Well, here's what's really happening. San Jose and these other liberal towns that are talking about doing this, what they're hoping to do is make it more difficult for you to own a gun because they don't want you to own a gun. They can't win in the court. They can't win on the Constitution. So they're going to try and make it too expensive for you to get it. It's only a $25 fee. Yeah, $25 fee and insurance, liability insurance. I don't even know where you can get this kind of insurance that they're talking about right now because you've never had to get it before. I'm sure some insurance company will step up to do it. Who knows how much that will cost, right? So, hey, let's go with the liberal playbook. If you're setting a fee for a constitutional right and an insurance policy, well, you know it's going to be hardest for the poor to do that. And people of color are disproportionately poor. So therefore, this is a racist policy. Ha ha! That's what they do every time. All right, here's the other problems with this. A legal gun owner abiding by the law is forced to buy insurance he doesn't need. How about we tell people they've got to buy insurance for their chainsaw or their axe or their baseball bat? Well, it's totally different. No, it's not different at all, except for the fact that those aren't constitutional rights. Criminals will not buy this insurance. Well, yeah, that's good, because if the criminals don't buy the liability insurance and then they commit a crime with a gun, then we can charge them with that and take away the gun. Guess what? If a criminal commits a crime with a gun, you can take away his gun right now. What it's really about is law-abiding citizens might not want to buy this. They may rebel and not buy this, and then maybe San Jose can go after them and try and seize their guns. No, I'm sure that would never happen. That would never happen. Ryan Savita, dailywire.com, talking about what's going on in Iran. I don't know if you follow this. 3 Biden administration negotiators working on trying to get Iran to enter a nuclear deal have left the team reportedly because they believe that Biden is being too soft on Iran. The team is divided over disagreements on how strictly existing sanctions should be enforced and at what point it should walk away from the table. As some experts warn, Iran is trying to prolong talks while they continue to work on their nuke program. Well, let's just talk it out. Maybe we could drop off a few more $100 billion in a plane. Spotify has sided with Joe Rogan. You remember the story I brought you the other day? Neil Young came out and he wrote a letter to his people, and it got over to Spotify, and he said he's mad at Joe Rogan for what he's been saying about COVID on Spotify. So he said they can have Rogan or Young, not both. And Spotify said, all right, see you later, Neil Young. So Spotify standing up for free speech. I'm so proud of Spotify. Not so much. I mean, there are some people that have been censored on Spotify, but Spotify is standing up for themselves because they have a deal they struck with Rogan in 2020, just 2 years ago, that's worth more than $100 million. So let's see, Rogan, $100 million. Neil Young, old and busted. All right, we're going with Joe Rogan. But Joe Rogan's not out of the woods because President Biden, Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, came out on MSNBC and suggested that Joe Rogan's podcast should be censored. Oh, yeah. He was specifically asked by MSNBC host Mika Brzezinski about alleged misinformation on Rogan's podcast. Here's the answer, some of the answer from the U.S. Surgeon General. This is not just about what the government can do. He's talking about dealing with the so-called misinformation. This is about what companies and individuals recognizing the only way to get past misinformation is if we are careful about what we say and use the power that we have to limit the spread of misinformation. So they get to determine what they call misinformation, and then it's up to the government and companies to limit the spread of that misinformation. Of course, much of the so-called misinformation they told us a year ago turned out to be fact. The CDC has to keep admitting they were wrong. Now, the Joe Rogan Experience podcast reaches about 11 million people per episode. CNN Primetime averages less than 1 million per episode. So they're ticked. How dare this Joe Rogan be? Just this week, co-hosts on The View seemed to advocate for Spotify to, quote, at least warn listeners that they could be exposed to misinformation if they listen to Joe Rogan. So glad we're all for free speech now. And talking about misinformation, the CDC's been pushing that children should be masked at schools. And Europe's getting rid of that now because they've finally figured it out. Well, the Atlantic, the very liberal Atlantic, has a piece that school masking is not justified by the data. And they go through 3 CDC studies. He said, to our knowledge, the CDC has performed 3 studies to determine whether masking children in school reduces COVID-19 transmission. The first was an elementary school in Georgia, several schools in Georgia. That was before vaccines. It found masking teachers was associated with a statistically significant decrease in transmission, but masking students was not. Then the second study, and it was the most dramatic one by far, had many serious problems with it. And in fact, as it was being reviewed, some said it should not have been entered into the public discourse at all. The third study found U.S. counties without mask mandates did see larger increases in pediatric COVID-19 cases after schools opened, but they did not control for important differences in vaccination rates. The CDC has cited several other studies conducted in the previous school year to support its claim that masks are a key school safety measure. However, none of the studies isolated the impact of masks specifically because all students were required to mask and no comparisons were made with schools that did not require masks. So basically, these studies are useless. There are only two randomized trials that have measured the impact of masks on COVID transmission. The first in Denmark, the spring of 2020. Guess what it found? No significant effect of masks on reducing COVID-19 transmission. The second, Bangladesh. And this one that the CDC loves because it did show that surgical masks, not cloth, were modestly effective at reducing rates of symptomatic infection. However, the study did not include children, let alone vaccinated children. So how does that work exactly to say that therefore kids must be masked in schools? And of course, we now know that the cloth mask is virtually useless. The surgical mask is slightly better. The N95 is the best, but even those, we don't have any studies to show that that would stop children from getting COVID. And then you look at the risk of healthy children getting COVID. It is infinitesimal. I mean, truly, your kid is greater at risk of dying in your car driving to and from school than from COVID. And yet, here's Fauci, Chris Pandolfo reporting that Fauci is now talking about children from 6 months old to 4 getting the vaccination. It looks like it'll be a 3-dose regimen. I don't think we can predict when we will see an emergency use authorization with that because the companies are still putting the data before the FDA. I mean, it'll be a little bit, but don't worry. We're doing everything we need to make sure that your child, your 6-month-old, will be safe to take the vaccination whether you want it or not. I mean, when you decide to give it to him. Marty Makary, doctor, professor at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, and he wrote a piece for the Wall Street Journal on the high cost of disparaging natural immunity to COVID. He said vaccines were wasted on those who didn't need them, and people who posed no risk lost jobs. Now, I'm going to quote a little bit from Makary here because he has written a great piece on this. And he's pointing out, some of the things that used to be called misinformation that now absolutely are fact. For most of the last year, many of us called for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to release its data on reinfection rates, meaning you had COVID and then you got better and then you got it again. The agency refused. Why would you refuse to do that? And for a while, they weren't even counting it. Finally, last week, the CDC released data from New York and California. It demonstrated natural immunity, that means you got COVID and you got better, was 2.8 times as effective in preventing hospitalization, 3.3 to 4.7 times as effective in preventing COVID infection, compared with vaccination. So It's better to have been recovered from COVID than to get vaccinated. That doesn't mean run out and get COVID. And that's what if you tell people that, everyone's going to want to get COVID. No, but it's saying if you have had COVID and gotten better, you don't need to be vaccinated. How dare you say that? Well, it's the truth. The CDC spun that report, though, again, to fit its narrative. They said vaccination remains the safest strategy. And it based that on the finding that if you had been previously infected, gotten better, and gotten vaccinated, there was a slightly lower risk of testing positive for COVID. But they had a similar low rate of hospitalization to those with natural immunity alone. In other words, vaccinating people who had already had COVID did not significantly reduce the risk of hospitalization. And that's what we're talking about, right? Hospitalization and death. Well, the National Institutes of Health repeatedly has dismissed natural immunity by arguing its duration is unknown, and then they didn't conduct any studies to find out what the duration was. Think about that. Well, we can't say that this is really good because we don't know how long it'll last. Well, should we study it? Well, we don't want to study it. We're studying how long the vaccinations last. What? Well, guess what? Johns Hopkins did it instead. Dr. McCary and his associates did a study. They found among 295 unvaccinated people who previously had COVID, the antibodies were present in 99% of them up to nearly 2 years after infection. Not a booster every 3 months, 2 years. They also found that natural immunity developed from prior variants reduced the risk of infection with the Omicron variant as well. Compare that to the effectiveness of the 2-dose Moderna vaccine against infection. It declined 61% against Delta, 16% against Omicron at 6 months. Pfizer's COVID vaccines have been less effective than Moderna's. 100 other studies on natural immunity have found the immune system works, and of course, that's what we expect. The one in Israel, the largest study, found natural immunity 27 times as effective as vaccinated immunity in preventing symptomatic illness. And yet instead, what we have people getting booted out of work and out of the military who have natural immunity. Unbelievable. I like at the end of this, Dr. McCary says, Connecticut has suspended its vaccine mandate for state employees. Starbucks rehiring employees fired for being unvaccinated. Other states and businesses should follow their lead. Politicians and public health officials owe an apology to Americans who lost their jobs on the false premises that only unvaccinated people could spread the virus and only vaccination could prevent the spread. Soldiers who have been dishonorably discharged should be restored their rank. Teachers, first responders, and others who have been denied their livelihood should be reinstated. Everyone is essential. Absolutely. Finally, I just got to tell you this story because I love to watch liberal people's heads explode. Matt Palumbo reported that Donald Trump was out golfing with somebody, and the guy he was golfing with had his cell phone out, and he was videotaping the former president stepping up to the tee, and he was narrating, now on the tee, the 45th president of the United States. And then Trump goes, the 45th and the 47th, as he stepped up to tee off. The 45th and the 47th. I wonder if he's running again. My name's Greg Knapp. This is the Greg Knapp Experience.